I'll give you just a brief history of my tenure in the Saanich Peninsula area. I attended Strawberryville School in the one-room schoolhouse that is still standing on the upper section. My parents were responsible for saving that and getting it moved up to where it is now. That was grade 1, 2, and 3 in the same room. It was interesting. From there, I went to Mount View High School, graduated from there. And in '54, that school is no longer in existence, of course. From there, I went into construction a wee bit, working for Farmer Construction as a laborer for a couple years. But in the meantime, before I did that, I acquired the property where I started my nursery when I was in grade 10 and 11 in high school. And that's where I started the nursery, which was called Rosedale Nursery. I grew perennials, shrubs, and it gradually evolved in greenhouses, and I was growing poinsettias and potted plants and that for sale. It became a problem getting enough volume to sell, so I always wanted to have my own store. So that's when I purchased the store at Royal Oak from Lloyd Park, who had originally started the garden center there. I stepped ahead a wee bit there. My growing up years, I was acquainted with this area vaguely because during the Christmas season, I came up here, and there used to be a small turkey farm right beside the creek. I don't know whether you're familiar with that. I know I came up here and I was helping clean turkeys. And it was established just down the road here by the creek. I don't know the name of the person. A friend of mine, the Kempsters, they had relatives. That was the old building that was called the Bonnie Doon. Anybody familiar with that? No, it was an older building there, and they had relatives that lived in that house who were relatives of the Yales, of the Yale BC family. So I was acquainted with, most of you are familiar with the Quick family, the Quick Bottom. I was very good friends with Fred Quick, who, of course, Buster Quick operated the small dairy farm across there. My growing up years, I lived right 2 houses removed from where the prison is now on Wilkinson Road. And there was another dairy farm down in there. It was about 20 to 25 herd dairy farm right down by Colquitt's Creek. Very little housing in the whole area. It was just 1 or 2 houses here and there. As I moved further up, getting older, the volume I needed to do to dispose of the plants I was growing, that's when I acquired the store at Elk Lake, or Royal Oak from Lloyd Park. That was a big transition for me. We were raising a young family, and we had just got a mortgage to build our house on Rosedale, and we used all that money to buy the business. So it was a struggle that, like all people with our graying hair, went through. One of the few things that I remember on coming up this way was the 5-way intersection on Interurban, where there was a general store and the Colquitt's post office. And that's where I acquired enough money to purchase the property. I used to deliver groceries all the way to pretty near up to West Saanich here on my bike for a Mr. Phillips who operated the grocery store. And so I was vaguely familiar with the area. So the transition into the Royal Oak Shopping Centre was quite a traumatic turn of my life, really, there. So there was only a very few stores in that at that point. There was a garden centre, a coffee shop, a smaller grocery store, and I can't remember the name of the grocery store. Hopefully somebody can help me on there. Pardon? Tom? Tomboy? It was no, I'm not sure what it was. It's basically at the end where the optical station place is now. That's where it was. That was the first run. That was the only strip of buildings right there. So there wasn't too many businesses in that location at that time. On the upper section where the medical imaging place is now, there was Doug Crosby had the drugstore. McConnell's had the takeout fish and chips, best fish and chips in town. And there was one other business in that section, and I'm not familiar which one it was. Yes, Lund's Bakery, thank you. Pardon? They made wonderful pound cakes. From there, that stayed in that configuration for quite a few years, really, until they decided to add to the branch that we had the garden center in. So they added to that section and added a few more stores. They added a sporting goods store at that point. There was a hobby shop that sold hobby supplies and fish. I forget the name of the gentleman who had that. The Cloth Castle fabric store was there. And there was one or two more which I've lost. It stayed in that configuration for quite a few years, and then they decided to add the other wing opposite us, where Fombo's restaurant was. They added to that section, which changed the whole configuration of the center, as well as at the same time they added to the upper section where the old drugstore was, and added all those stores, and the medical building was put in around that period too. When they decided to, and this is where I'm very confused at timing on it. I'll step back a couple of years in the fact when we had the garden center originally, I used the open field behind that strip. I think it was a man by the name of Mr. Turner that had that, and I rented that property for storing the nursery stock at the back of the store. So the next major move we had in the center was they decided to build a grocery store where it is now, as well as doing some renovations and moving the existing store into there. So in that process, we were moved into where Reg had his butcher shop during the busy Christmas season, which was a disaster. An awful time to move into a new premise. It was a very narrow strip of the building, but we managed. So we had to do business there for about 4 or 5 months in a temporary, as they built the new grocery store where it is now. And some of the building, they added more buildings on the Fombo section at that time. There was so many different additions at different times there, it was getting very difficult to organize the time. My business personally in the garden center business evolved as a florist shop, as a garden center, and as time went by, really, the florist shop was the predominant part of our business. So it was becoming a very busy store for myself personally. I operated the store, and we had about 4 different employees working for us at that time. My wife looked after the nursery. The timing of garden center business and florists, they interact in the fact that you're busiest in the florist section when you're tapering off in the nursery section, and vice versa. So there was never any rest. It was seven days a week. It was I raised my half family with that very successfully. After we moved into the new, when they finished the renovation, we moved out of the temporary butcher shop into our garden center. We had a greenhouse at the back of that. We were fast running out of space, so I approached the owners of the shopping center if I could add another addition to the building, which was the leasehold improvement. So we added another, I think it was 600 square feet to our store at that point, and that is where the optical store is now at the corner. That part of the building is what we added to the shopping center at that point. One of the interesting things on all of this is the fact that we always knew everybody by face, but very few of the people I really acquired their names to. So I'll recognize people, but I personally can't put a name to it. Although it's funny, coming here today, there was quite a few people I did recognize. I couldn't put a name for it. As Bonnie said, our sons played together at lacrosse. And I forget your name. She worked at the accountant's office, so we seen her once a year when we took our financial reports in for. There's a few other faces here I do recognize. It's basically from along being here, from recognizing as customers in our store. I understand you will be having one of the Winterbottoms coming to give you a talk. They were next door to 2 doors down from us in the original wing. I cannot remember the name of the people who operated, the boys that operated the sporting goods store. Can anybody help me out there? No help. That was just total loss. The owners of the Cloth Castle in Langford now are there, but they had a really good business before they moved. I can't think of too many other things that happened at Royal Oak in that years. It has certainly changed in configuration now than to what it was 20 years, because I have been gone from there now for 26 years, believe it or not. From there I've moved over to out to North Saanich. I'm where I reside now, and pursuing a very active hobby of wood turning, completely removed from gardening. But I do still have an acre of property which I try to keep maintained. Yes?
What year did the hardware store open and when did it close?
They opened on the first major extension to that wing, which the garden center was in. So I would put it 47, 79. I would put it about 1980. They opened. I think it would be somewhere in that vicinity. And that would be the same time the sporting goods store opened, and the Cloth Castle. All those businesses came in at that point. So I'm not quite familiar with what date it was, but I think it would be around 1979, 1980. Yes.
Reg Thomas had a butcher shop there at Royal Oak.
Yes.
And I understand when he left, you took over his shop, is that right?
Well, yeah, that's when they did a major renovation to that section. I think he left at that point. Yeah.
Every Saturday and ordered a shell-bone roast.
Yeah, because he was still in business because they put a dividing wall in between his butcher shop and my garden center. So we were side by side with a temporary wall between us. It wasn't very good for him because I sold insecticides and garden powders. Wasn't too good for a butcher shop. But we got along. It was temporary, 6 months. Yes.
The Turner family that you mentioned, did they have a farm there that you were talking about?
No, it was a family home. He had acreage behind, and that's where the Eaton's warehouse complex was built. I don't know what that's used for now, but it was that field behind the garden center.
Okay.
And
I'm not sure, but I think my aunt, they used to be involved with the Turner family, my aunt and uncle.
yeah, it could be. I never knew them really that well, but I did use the land behind there, which he had. In around that time too, I acquired the corner opposite the back entrance of the Royal Oak Shopping Center. Is it a senior citizens complex there now, or just condominiums?
I think it's just condominiums.
Yeah. Well, I owned that piece of property for about 5 years. Tried to get it rezoned from Saanich. I wanted to build a standalone garden center, and which didn't materialize. They wouldn't pass the zoning, so eventually Saanich bought the property for me to build that complex there. So.
Were there wholesalers on the island for your flowers, or did you have to go to Vancouver?
I spent basically 2 days a week traveling the last ferry to the first ferry, going over to the flower auction to buy the flower section. I produced from the nursery at Royal Oak, where the Strawberryville School is now. I grew most of our plant material there myself, but the flowers and that I did get in Vancouver at the flower auction. That was an early morning. It started at 6 in the morning, and you had to rush to get the ferry. Yes.
At the beginning of your talk, Bob, you mentioned the name Kempster.
Yes.
Is that Bill and B. Kempster?
Correct.
Bill? Are you still in contact with your son?
No. Bill passed away just prior to Christmas, I guess. There was no notice except a very 2 or 3 line obituary in the paper. Bill Kempster passed away at age 91, I think. And that was it.
You have no idea where his son is.
The son, to best of my knowledge, lives in the Highlands.
Oh.
And I presume he's still there. But I have had no contact with the son since. He had some connection with the Sanishan Fairgrounds, whether he still does.
Oh.
That might be a lead to get in contact with him.
Right. I've tried at the Horse Center several times, but nobody seems to know.
No, but try the Sanishan Fair executive, because he was part of the executive there for a couple of years. The son was. So you might be able to tie him in there somewhere. Was there any other? Yes.
What got you interested in growing plants and flowers?
It was one of the things I just enjoyed doing. I was very interested in botany and even in grade school. My parents had a property on Wilkinson Road next to the prison, and they had an extra lot beside there, so I cultivated that and just grew plants. It was one of the things I just enjoyed doing. It's a very relaxing form of work. It is work, though. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Not a question so much, but you mentioned the coffee shop.
Yes.
Is that the strip coffee shop that was right where you left the parking lot to go past Schwann's and up past Slater's?
Actually, the original coffee shop was very close to where that coffee shop is now, at the end of that wing. It's because you forget these things, as you know, you really do. These things start to come back when you start to talk to people and people interject with different things. All of a sudden, oh, that was what it was. It is hard to get. The last month since I was asked to come and do this, I've laid in bed at night trying to figure out all this. I lost a lot of sleep over this. Is there any other? Yes.
I'm pretty sure that my dad supplied you with holly and wreaths at the Christmas season. That was Frank Doyle from what's now Doyle Road. But I haven't.
Yeah, he was connected with the Artifact Society, I believe. Correct. Yes. He supplied me with greens and some holly. When I upgraded my boilers and that at the nursery, I donated my boiler, which was an old-style locomotive boiler, and Frank Doyle administrated that to get it to the Artifact Society. So I didn't know Frank all that well, but he was glad to get the locomotive boiler at that time. So I'd forgotten all about that. Yes.
Did you ever know an Ed Lowrunner?
Oh, I work for Ed Lowburner.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
My dad, he planted a lot of our plants on 52 Portland.
Yeah. I worked with Ed Lowburner and Doris Page was there at the time, who had the TV program. I think it was called The Garden Shed on Chex TV. Ed Lowburner, I was working for him at that time. We did the original planting in Abkhazi Gardens. That was a very knowledgeable man. He was probably the foremost expert on alpine plants in Western Canada and the U.S. at that time. Very, very knowledgeable. Doris was a very knowledgeable person too, who worked for him. Yes. Yeah, his nursery was laid out quite a bit different than the average nursery is nowadays. He was dead against mass selling of plants in garden centers. He was a hands-on man. Any other notations or, yes?
I was just wondering, you were a flower shop, and did you make flower arrangements and corsages and, bridal bouquets and all sorts of things? And who did that? Was it you?
I did a lot of it.
Did you?
I eventually got overwhelming, and I couldn't handle all of it, so that's when I started to have to hire floral designers. It ended up I had 3 designers working pretty well full time on the flower section. But I still keep in contact with a few of them.
Would those flowers have come from Vancouver, or was there a supplier?
Most of those would have come from the flower auction in Vancouver. That's for most of them. Although there are wholesalers that travel around and drop off flowers to the different shops, but they are also acquired from the Vancouver flower auction. So it's the primary source of flowers now is the auction in Vancouver. Yeah.
Where do all those flowers come from? They're obviously not local because are they in other countries?
Most of them are produced in BC. Devise, Burnaby Lake, they're big greenhouse. They've got, at peak seasons for roses and that, a lot of the roses, when I was in business, came from Israel. It's hard to believe they can ship flowers all that way, and but it does happen. But the interesting thing with the flower auction, it started off as, I don't know if any of you are familiar with how the auction works, but the clock starts off at a high price and graduates down, and you press a button and decide what price you want to pay. Well, if you press too high, you never lived it down with all the other buyers because they knew what the price was going to be. But I think it's operating on 3 clocks now. It's mind-boggling. You just elaborating on your comment there about how the area is going to grow and the price buy now, because if prices are going to go up for property. When I bought the property where I established my nursery, I was in grade 10 to 11 in high school. I bought that from a couple. There was 6 lots involved in They had bought it. Their family had bought it in the 20s when there was a land boom in Saanich, and there was apparently a very big land boom which went bust. So they held that property for probably 50 years, pretty near. I bought those lots at $200 a lot. It's unbelievable. And they allowed me to buy each one lot every year for 5 years. So, in hindsight, things they improve, but it's nice to look back in the old days. And we're all getting a bit grayer on the top. So with that, I guess I'll close it off. Thank you very much for having me. But I'll think of a dozen other things tonight when I get home that I should have.